Women's March is underway today, and more than 250 demonstrations were originally planned nationwide as marchers are making an election year call for change and equality just days ahead of the impeachment trial in the Senate. Now, the first Women's March took place just a day after President Trump's 2017 inauguration. That was thought to be the largest single-day demonstration in the U.S. since the Vietnam War. Dasha Burns is at the march in Washington, D.C., where these marches first started. And Dasha, we always like to get a sense of, how was the turnout this year compared to years past, and what were the messaging?
That's right. So I'm standing, Richard, where the march kicked off today here in Freedom Plaza. And while the weather was not necessarily kind to participants today, we've seen everything from rain to snow and all the mess in between. There was a lot of energy, but the energy was much bigger than the crowd size this year. And there are a few ways that this march feels different than in years past. First, for the participants that did show up, they talked about how this particular political moment made this march more poignant to them personally. Remember, as you said, this movement initially kicked off as a response to the election of Donald Trump, and now he has been impeached. And so that's something that supporters really, that participants really focused on today. I want to play you some sound from what we heard earlier today here in Freedom Plaza. Take a listen. You came here from California. What made you brave the cold and come out here today?
Because I think that it's extremely important that we get together to try and get Trump out of office. And it's an election year. It's never been a more important time to be here.
It's time more than ever that women have to come together and actually speak up for our rights and speak up to, what's going on in the world. And without us, there is no change.
But, Richard, crowd size was definitely down, certainly the lowest of the four marches so far. And when I asked people why they thought that was the case, they said a lot of folks do feel a little bit discouraged. They don't feel like they're seeing progress at the rate that they were hoping for. All of that hope and the groundswell of energy that we saw back in 2017 has started to dwindle a little bit. Still, organizers do point to the record number of women running for office as an example of the progress that this movement has contributed to.
All right. NBC correspondent Dasha Burns, thank you for being out there for us in Washington, D.C. A rainy one there, a snowy one here in New York. The 2020 election cycle began with a record number of women running for president, speaking of which Dasha was reporting on. And now 2 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses, 3 female candidates remain. The issue of whether a woman can be elected to the White House, well, that emerged at this week's Democratic debate. Take a listen.
Anybody knows me knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States.
This question about whether or not a woman can be president has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it head on. And I think the best way to talk about who can win is by looking at people's winning record. So, can a woman beat Donald Trump? Look at the men on this stage. Collectively, they have lost 10 elections. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women, Amy and me.
Well, the year 2020, it marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. That amendment protects women's constitutional right to vote. And one benchmark since then, 2016. Hillary Clinton became the first woman to ever win a presidential nomination. She also won the popular vote with nearly 3 million more votes than Donald Trump in the general election. And the 2018 midterm elections, another record, 117 women won seats in Congress. Joining me now, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton, Adrian Elrod, and Democratic strategist Alaina Beverly. Thank you so much for being with us. And Alana, let me start with you on this. That very debate that we saw with the Democrats on the stage and that home run of a comment, at least by crowd response, by Elizabeth Warren, really indicated still a gap that exists today.
Absolutely. Well, if the question is whether or not a woman can win the presidency, the answer is a resounding yes. Women are 54% of the registered voters. We are 51% of the population. And you said in your introduction that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes. So it's not a question about whether or not we can, it's a matter of when. And the challenge, and we've seen the furor over the debate between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren play out over the last week. The challenge is whether or not the candidates themselves have a vision of America where the electorate will vote for a woman for president. The polls show that the majority of Americans say that they would vote for a woman candidate for president, but they are concerned that their neighbors won't vote. Only 16% believe that their neighbors will vote for a woman president. So what we're dealing with in this election cycle is really the question of electability and what it means to be presidential, and dispelling the myth that women are neither, or affirming that women can be president and, in fact, are electable.
When might we see here, Adrian, the front runner being one of the 3 women this cycle?
Well, look, we will see how things play out, Richard. But, look, I think we got to look at 2016 in terms of what actually happened. The bottom line is, as we just mentioned, Hillary Clinton did receive almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. But that is not what there's a false misperception because she lost to Trump in terms of the Electoral College that a woman cannot then defeat Trump now in 2020. We've got to keep in mind, Trump barnstormed through the Republican Party. Whether or not we want to acknowledge this or not, America, or at least a majority of Americans, slight majority of Americans, were ready for somebody like Donald Trump. So that's why I think you've got this false misperception. Also, anybody who's ever worked for a female candidate, either running for president or down the ballot, will tell you this is a really tricky question for a female candidate to have to maneuver. And I give major props to Senators Warren and Klobuchar for addressing this head on the campaign trail, because it is something that we will not get over as a collective society until this is addressed. But again, it's a false misperception that a woman cannot win. A woman did defeat Trump in terms of raw numbers in 2016. It can happen again. America, for whatever reason, was ready for Trump in 2016. We are seeing that a majority of Americans, at least at this point, want to see Trump defeated, and a woman could certainly do that.
Alaina, when you look at what the next steps might be, we've got Iowa in front of us, and folks might say, well, we'll really be able to understand how strong a woman candidate can be after we see Iowa and New Hampshire. What are you watching in those 2 early state votes in terms of what we'll see and what we'll learn from it?
Iowa and New Hampshire are very important, but frankly, I want to see this play out all the way through Super Tuesday, where we have states that have a demography that reflects the diversity of the Democratic Party. And I think those states and Iowa, frankly, are going to do well. I know that Elizabeth Warren is slipping a bit in the polls in Iowa, but I think that as we see the electoral primaries play out, you're going to see her gain traction. So I'm interested not just in what the Iowa gates open, but also what we see as we move through Super Tuesday.
Interesting. And Adrian, would you agree with that? South Carolina, Texas, California, states like that, New Mexico, Nevada?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got to keep in mind that only 5% of the delegates are awarded in the first 4 states. By the time Super Tuesday is complete, 40% of the delegates will be awarded. And I know that there is, of course, a major focus on the first 4, but really we need to focus on Super Tuesday because that's where the diversity is. That's where a bulk of the voters will be voting in the Democratic primary. And look, the other thing to keep in mind is there is a demand, not just an assumption, but a demand by Democrats now that a woman be on the ticket. So even if that woman is not the presidential nominee, the vice president has got to be a woman. That is a major significant step that we've made forward in this country. But I'd love to see a woman be president too in the near future.
All righty. Adrian Elrod and Alaina Beverly, thank you both so much. That wraps it up for me this hour. I'm Richard Louie. I'll see you back here at 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one.